He thought authority could bury the truth. Clarence Thomas shouted, "Get out," to crush Jasmine Crockett. Instead, she stood her ground and laid bare the millions in luxury gifts and secret favors he tried to hide. The clash became a national eruption over bribery at the highest court. When money buys justice, who dares to pay the price? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The chamber is tense, cameras flashing, as every second streams live across America. Clarence Thomas sits stiff, his robe heavy with power, his presence commanding the room. Yet the weight of scandal hangs over him like a storm cloud, whispers of luxury gifts and secret favors filling the air. This is no ordinary hearing. This is a confrontation that could shake the nation. Every eye, every lens is fixed on the two figures about to collide. Jasmine Crockett enters steady but burning inside. She is not bred from privilege. She comes from Dallas, a district Thomas once dismissed as small and unworthy. She carries the voice of the people who fight every day without yachts, without mansions, without billionaires to shield them. Tonight, she isn't just a congresswoman. She is the spark meant to light the shadows. Her eyes lock on Thomas, daring him to look away. Thomas glares, his face hard as a stone, and snaps. This court has no place for theatrics. The silence cuts like a blade. Jasmine leans forward, her voice steady, defiant. Justice is not a stage, but the truth must be brought to light. The words land like thunder. The chamber freezes, millions of Americans gripping their screens. A war has begun. The silence left hanging from the first exchange is electric, thick enough to choke on. Millions of Americans lean closer to their screens, feeling something seismic building. Jasmine Crockett doesn't hesitate. She knows hesitation is weakness. She leans forward, eyes locked on Clarence Thomas, and slides a folder from the pile before her. The cameras zoom in, capturing her every move like a predator closing in on prey. This is no longer just oversight, it is combat. She raises her voice so the whole chamber hears. Justice Thomas, these records released by ProPublica's 2023 investigation confirm luxury yacht trips taken with billionaire Harlan Crow. The name detonates like an explosion. Gasps ripple through the crowd, reporters scramble to scribble notes, and the tension ratchets up another notch. America has read about this in headlines, but seeing it laid bare in this hearing with Thomas trapped in his chair turns rumor into brutal reality. The chamber is no longer just a room, it is a stage of reckoning. Thomas lets out a sharp laugh, shaking his head, the sound drenched in arrogance. He leans back, spreading his hands as if the accusation is beneath him. That is nothing more than a long-standing friendship, he says, his voice thick with disdain. The words roll through the air like smoke meant to smother the fire. He believes he can dismiss it all with one wave of his authority. His eyes are cold, daring Jasmine to push further. The arrogance of a man who has lived untouchable for decades radiates from him like heat. But Jasmine doesn't blink. Slowly, deliberately, she pulls out another piece of evidence. This time it isn't words on paper. It's an image. She holds up the photograph published in the New York Times expose, and the screen behind her lights up in brutal detail. Clarence Thomas standing on the shining deck of a yacht worth millions, grinning against a glittering sea. Luxury etched into every pixel, arrogance captured in every frame. The effect is immediate, violent. Gasps erupt like thunder. Whispers explode into shouts. Journalists nearly leap from their seats. The photo is undeniable proof a weapon fired point blank at Thomas's credibility. The chamber vibrates with outrage and disbelief. Viewers at home shout at their televisions, stunned by the audacity of it all. Thomas's smirk curdles into rage. He leans forward, his face hardening into stone, and spits venom across the chamber. "You are nothing but a small-time congresswoman," he snarls. "You have no real understanding of the Supreme Court or its authority." The words drip with contempt, sharpened to humiliate her on live television. His tone says she is unworthy, beneath him, disposable. The insult slams into the room like a hammer. But Jasmine doesn't retreat. She doesn't even flinch. She lets the insult hang for a beat, lets the cameras drink it in, lets the nation feel the weight of his cruelty. Then she leans forward, her voice rising, every syllable like steel. "I am not asking about the law," she fires back. "I am asking about morality." Her words land like a blade cutting through armor. For the first time, Thomas is the one on defense. The chamber freezes. The image of Thomas on that yacht glows on the screen, a silent witness that cannot be denied. His dismissal of friendship evaporates under the spotlight. Jasmine's retort reverberates through the air stronger than any gavel strike. This is not a question of technicalities. This is a question of conscience, of integrity, of whether justice itself has been sold. And in that moment, the entire nation sees what Thomas refuses to admit. The robe may still sit on his shoulders, but the mask of authority has cracked. The photograph of Thomas on the yacht still hangs on the massive screen, its glare burning into the eyes of everyone in the chamber. The gasps and murmurs have not faded, but Jasmine does not wait for silence. She leans forward, her gaze locked on Clarence Thomas. If the yacht trips revealed indulgence, the next strike exposes corruption rooted in stone and soil. She draws a deep breath, her voice sharp as a blade. Just as Thomas, Jasmine begins her tone steady and cutting. Let's talk about property. Harlan Crow didn't just host you on yachts. He bought your mother's house in Savannah, Georgia, along with 2 adjoining lots for over $1 million. That isn't friendship. That is a transaction. The words hit like a detonation. Reporters spring forward, pens scratching wildly. Cameras whirl and click in a frenzy. The entire chamber seems to lean toward her, and across America, millions of viewers sit frozen, their hearts pounding. This is not rumor or speculation. This is real estate money, recorded deeds, evidence carved into public records. Evidence that cannot be laughed away. Thomas's face erupts in red, the composure he once wore now shredded. His hand slams down on the desk with a crack so loud it ricochets through the chamber like a gunshot. Papers scatter, microphones tremble. His fury pours into the microphone, his voice booming through the room. "Get out!" he roars, his finger stabbing toward Jasmine. "You have no standing to question me. You come from a tiny, insignificant district in Dallas. What do you know about the honor of the Supreme Court?" The chamber gasps in unison. It is no longer about law, no longer about facts. It is personal, vicious, a dagger aimed straight at her roots. Every camera captures his sneer. Every viewer hears the venom in his tone. His attack is not meant to defend himself. It is meant to humiliate her in front of the world. But Thomas is not finished. He leans forward, his eyes narrowing into slits of contempt. "Who do you think you are, Rosa Parks? You are nothing but a troublemaker. Don't fool yourself into thinking you can change history." The words land like poison. The insult cuts not only at Jasmine, but at the legacy of civil rights itself. He invokes Rosa Parks only to twist her memory into mockery, to paint Jasmine as an imposter. The chamber feels strangled by the weight of his words, the silence that follows so heavy it seems to press against every chest. All eyes swing to Jasmine. The cameras zoom in, searching for cracks, waiting for her to wither under the onslaught. Millions of Americans watch in silence, wondering if this is the moment he crushes her. Thomas has chosen humiliation over argument, contempt over evidence. He expects her to break. And then in a final surge of fury, Thomas snaps his head toward the guards posted at the walls. His command rips through the chamber. "Remove her. Get her out of here now." The words crack like thunder. For a breathless second, it seems inevitable. Jasmine Crockett dragged from the chamber, under the glare of television lights, silenced by raw power. The order of a Supreme Court justice carries weight like a hammer, and the room braces for the blow. But the blow never lands. The guards hesitate. Their eyes flicker to one another, uncertainty tightening their faces. Their hands twitch at their belts, but their feet remain planted. The cameras capture every second of their stillness. The nation watches as they defy him, not with rebellion in words, but with refusal in silence. To obey would make them accomplices to disgrace. Their inaction becomes its own thunderclap. The atmosphere is unbearable, charged with electricity like the moment before lightning strikes. And then Jasmine moves. Slowly, deliberately, she rises from her chair. The scrape of the chair legs against the marble floor cuts through the silence like steel. The cameras close in on her, her frame tall and unshaken, her presence defiant against the grandeur of the chamber. Her eyes burn, her voice steady and thunderous. "You tell me to get out, but it is justice itself that demands you leave. I stand here for the people you have dismissed and despised." The chamber detonates. Reporters shout questions. Flashes explode like fireworks. The gallery erupts into gasps and murmurs of support. Across America, millions leap to their feet, some shouting, some crying, others simply stunned. What they are witnessing is no longer a hearing, it is a reckoning. Clarence Thomas sits rigid, his authority cracked, his insults turned against him. The command he believed would erase her has backfired. The words he hurled to diminish her have only elevated her. Jasmine Crockett has not been silenced. She has been transformed. The moment is irreversible. A congresswoman from a so-called small district in Dallas has stood toe-to-toe with a Supreme Court justice, endured his rage, resisted his threats, and answered with truth that cannot be unspoken. The power meant to destroy her has forged her into something greater, a symbol of defiance, a voice no one can drag out. The chamber hums with the sound of history being written. Reporters scribble cameras where the crowd stirs with awe and disbelief. Across the nation, Americans know they will remember this night. They will remember the moment when arrogance met resistance, when contempt met courage. And they will remember the woman who refused to leave. The echoes of "Get Out" still hang in the chamber, like smoke after an explosion. But Jasmine is not finished. She leans forward again, the weight of silence her ally now, her eyes locked on Clarence Thomas. The last attack tore into his personal conduct, but this one will strike at the very core of his judicial record. Her voice cuts sharp. Let us move from yachts and houses to rulings. Clarence Thomas, in 2010, you joined the majority in Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission. She pauses to let the name ring through the hall. That decision unleashed a flood of corporate money into American elections. Super political action committees were born overnight. Billions of dollars poured in from billionaires like Harlan Crow and others, drowning out the voices of ordinary citizens. Gasps ripple across the gallery. Jasmine does not let up. You told this country that unlimited corporate spending was free speech. But what you really did was hand the loudest microphones to the richest men. After that decision, billionaires were no longer donors, they became kingmakers. Candidates rearranged their calendars for them, rewrote their policies for them, bent the nation's democracy around their checkbooks. She lifts a chart, the line of campaign spending spiking upward after 2010. This is the evidence, she says, her voice firm. This is not theory, it is money. It is elections bought and sold like commodities. And Justice Thomas, you were the vote that unlocked the gates. The room holds its breath. Jasmine leans in closer, her voice low but cutting. Tell me, does your justice serve the people, or does it serve those who pay? The words hang in the chamber like a live grenade. The scribble of reporters' pens falls silent. Even the cameras seem to hold their breath. In homes across America, viewers lean toward their screens, waiting for an answer that could restore faith or shatter it. Thomas shifts in his chair, his lips parting. Precedent, he mutters. The word falls weak, brittle like glass, cracking under weight. He tries again. The First Amendment. His tongue stumbles, his eyes dart to the ceiling, to the floor, anywhere but at her. The justification dissolves into fragments. Sweat beads at his temple. For the first time, the robe looks heavy on his shoulders. Jasmine strikes again. Citizens United was not the only one. Case after case, your votes narrowed corruption laws, loosened the rules, made it harder to prosecute bribery, harder to stop billionaires from buying influence. You did not protect democracy. You put it on clearance for the highest bidder. She slams a stack of papers against the table, the sound reverberating like a gavel. You can call it doctrine. Families call it being priced out of their own voice. The murmurs rise in the gallery, a tide of disbelief and outrage. Reporters lean over their laptops, fingers flying. Across America, living rooms buzz with anger. For years, whispers about Thomas's bias lingered, but now the evidence is laid bare under lights too bright to deny. Thomas's throat bobs as he swallows. He shifts in his chair, pulling at the robe, as if the fabric itself is suffocating him. His mouth opens, then closes again. He starts a sentence. Context, interpretation, speech, but it collapses into silence. The stillness that follows is deafening, a void filled only by the thundering heartbeat of the nation. Jasmine lets the silence stretch, savoring the moment. Then she delivers the blow. Her voice is quiet, almost gentle, and that makes it deadlier. Justice cannot be owned, but you have allowed it to become a commodity. The chamber cracks with reaction. Gasps, murmurs, shouts of disbelief. The sentence slices through marble and oak, through cameras and cables, and straight into history. On screens across the nation, captions spell out her words, and millions read them with clenched fists and wide eyes. For decades, Clarence Thomas has been untouchable. Tonight, in front of the world, he sits exposed, not just for gifts and properties from Harlan Crow, not just for yacht trips and real estate deals, but for the decisions that tilted the balance of democracy toward those who could afford it. His silence, his stammers, his faltering answers are louder than any ruling he ever wrote. And as Jasmine squares her papers with a crisp snap, the cameras capture a single inescapable truth: power can be shaken, and even a justice can be made to tremble. The chamber is still trembling from Jasmine's last words. Clarence Thomas sits rigid, his robes suddenly heavy, his authority leaking like air from a punctured tire. The audience is restless, the press scribbling furiously, the cameras locked on every twitch of his face. But Jasmine knows this moment demands more. Charts and statistics have cracked his defenses, but tonight requires a blow that no one can dismiss. She straightens her notes, lifts her head, and lets her voice ring out. "I call a witness." The gallery gasps. Reporters shoot up in their seats, the air electric with disbelief. A hearing has just shifted into something much darker, something more dangerous. The side door opens and the sound of footsteps echoes across marble. A man walks in, shoulders squared, but eyes shadowed by the weight of what he carries. Jasmine's voice names him with precision. This is Daniel Harper, former logistics aide to billionaire Harlan Crow. For over a decade, he handled travel and accommodations for Crow and his guests. The chamber stiffens, jaws drop, the name detonating like dynamite. Harper takes the oath, his hand trembling only slightly, and sits. The silence is suffocating. Reporters hold their breath, their pens frozen above their notebooks. Millions at home lean forward, staring at screens as if waiting for lightning to strike. I personally arranged luxury yacht trips for Justice Thomas and his family. Harper begins, his voice steady now. All payments came directly from accounts tied to Harlan Crow. The chamber erupts. Gasps, whispers, frantic typing. Cameras flash so rapidly the room looks lit by a storm. Harper opens a folder and pulls out the first sheet. Invoice dated July 2017, Caribbean charter aboard the Michaela Rose. 14 nights. Total cost $2.3 million. Paid in full by Crow Holdings. He sets it down with a snap. He lifts another. Invoice dated August 2019, Mediterranean cruise aboard the Blue Horizon. 10 nights. Total $1.8 million. Again paid by Crow's personal account. He stacks them side by side, the figures glowing under the overhead lights. The crowd gasps louder, the sums echoing like thunder. These are not small favors. They are fortunes. Wealth measured in years of salary for working families reduced to vacation bills, casually handled by a billionaire for a Supreme Court justice. Clarence Thomas explodes. He leaps to his feet, his face crimson, his fist slamming the desk. "Lies," he bellows, his voice cracking with fury. This is slander. This is humiliation. His roar reverberates through the chamber, but the sound cannot drown out the numbers staring back at him. His denial bounces against marble walls, falling flat against paper proof, stamped with totals no one can ignore. Daniel Harper does not flinch. His voice rises over the chaos, stronger with every word. "I was there. I booked the trips. I saw the invoices. These payments were not rumors, they were transactions. Justice Thomas lived them. Harlan Crow paid them." He lays down a final sheet: invoice dated June 2021, South Pacific voyage. 3 weeks, cost $3.1 million. Paid entirely by Crow Holdings. The chamber detonates again. Murmurs shake the gallery, shouts of disbelief ring out, and reporters pound their keyboards like war drums. The evidence is not whispers or speculation anymore. It is numbers, ink, and signatures. Thomas hurls another roar, but the cracks are visible. His face is drenched in sweat, his jaw locked in rage. He looks less like a justice and more like a man cornered, his authority evaporating with every page laid before him. And then Jasmine rises. The scrape of her chair against marble cuts through the noise. She faces Thomas directly, the cameras zooming in to capture the collision of their eyes. Her voice is steady, her words sharp enough to pierce a stone. "You told me to get out," she says, every syllable ringing. But it is not me who will be leaving. The American people are the true owners of this chamber. And tonight they heard the truth. The words detonate. The gallery erupts into applause and cries of disbelief. The reporters' headlines practically write themselves. Secret witness reveals multi-million-dollar trips paid by Harlan Crow. On television screens across the country, the images sear into memory receipts marked in millions, a justice broken in silence, and a congresswoman standing tall. Clarence Thomas slumps back into his chair, drained and pale. His hands tremble as they clutch the desk, but his voice is gone. His roar has collapsed into silence, his authority cracked beyond repair. The evidence towers over him, each page heavier than the last. The knockout is complete. The billionaire's aide has spoken, the invoices have been revealed, and Jasmine's words have turned the chamber into a battlefield where truth has won. Across America, viewers know they have just witnessed history. The moment arrogance was cornered by receipts and silenced forever. The chamber was still buzzing when the footage left the building. Within minutes, the video of Clarence Thomas roaring, "Get out," and Jasmine Crockett standing her ground began to spread across every platform. By the end of the day, it had already broken records. Within 24 hours, it had been viewed more than 40 million times. What happened in that chamber was no longer confined to Washington. It had spilled into living rooms, street corners, and office break rooms across America. Clips flooded timelines in every format. Some showed the raw confrontation, Thomas pounding the desk and Jasmine rising to answer. Others highlighted her final words. "The American people are the true owners of this chamber." Edits stitched her defiance against sweeping shots of crowds cheering against images of working families against city skylines lit at night. The moment became something larger than a hearing. It became a story Americans could not look away from. Cable networks seized on it immediately. CNN ran the footage on repeat with banners flashing, "Crockett versus Thomas Luxury," in the shadows exposed. MSNBC's analysts leaned forward in disbelief, calling it one of the most extraordinary moments ever caught on Capitol Hill. Even Fox News, balancing uneasily between loyalty to the court and the undeniable spectacle, played the clip again and again. Commentators didn't need to embellish. The footage told the story all on its own, a justice consumed by rage, a congresswoman refusing to flinch. Headlines hammered the point home. The Washington Post declared Justice Thomas explodes as Jasmine Crockett stands firm. The New York Times carried a stark line, "Get out, moment shakes Supreme Court." Regional papers sharpened their angles, "Dallas Congresswoman faces down Supreme Court power." Local news anchors used words like unprecedented, seismic earthquake. The moment was not just news. It was history unfolding in real time. In coffee shops, people huddled around their phones replaying the confrontation. In grocery store aisles, strangers showed each other the clip, nodding in disbelief. A barber in Detroit paused mid-trim, holding his clippers as he said, "She didn't even blink." College students turned her words into chants echoing across campus lawns. Truck drivers streamed the clip during breaks, slamming dashboards in anger at Thomas's arrogance. The anger was not abstract. For millions, Thomas's command of "get out" felt personal. It was not only aimed at Jasmine, it seemed aimed at anyone who had ever been dismissed for not being rich enough, powerful enough, or connected enough. His contempt for Dallas, called a small, insignificant district, became shorthand for contempt toward working people everywhere. The insult was bigger than one congresswoman. It was a slap at the country itself. And Jasmine's answer flipped that insult into a rallying cry. She didn't shout. She didn't stumble. She stood tall and declared she would not leave, that the chamber belonged to the people. That contrast, his rage against her calm, struck something deep in the American psyche. People saw in her a reflection of their own fight to be heard. Commentators called it a David versus Goliath moment, a clash between arrogance and resolve that would echo far beyond the walls of Congress. Late-night comedians joined in amplifying the spectacle. One host shouted, "Get out," into his microphone before cutting to Jasmine's reply, and the audience roared with laughter and applause. The punchlines didn't weaken the moment they spread it further, carrying it into millions of homes where politics rarely entered. What had begun as a hearing was now a cultural lightning bolt. Jasmine Crockett became something more than a congresswoman from Dallas. Protesters carried signs with her words. Artists painted murals overnight, showing her standing tall under the glare of lights, Thomas's shadow crumbling behind her. On street corners, activists called her the people's voice. Across social media, Americans who had never heard her name before declared, "She speaks for us." The story was no longer about legal technicalities or campaign finance. It had become a referendum on power itself: who holds it, who abuses it, and who dares to challenge it. And in that referendum, Jasmine Crockett emerged as the voice of defiance. She had walked into that chamber as one lawmaker among many, but by the time the footage circled the globe, she was something else entirely. She was the voice of the people. By morning, the clip was no longer just a sensation. It was a summons. The doors of Congress opened, early corridors humming with staffers, hustling under fluorescent lights, and an emergency banner flashed across the House schedule. Inside, the Speaker's gavel cracked the air, and a clerk read the title of a draft bill, in a voice that carried to the rafters: Supreme Court Ethics and Financial Transparency Act. It proposed real asset disclosures for justices, mandatory recusals in conflicts, and criminal penalties for willful concealment. No one pretended this was routine. The building felt like it had tilted toward a reckoning. Committee rooms filled past capacity and cameras blinked red like warning lights. Jasmine Crockett arrived to a low roar from the hall, not applause, but the subsonic sound of attention gathering. She set folders on the table, the same neat stack that had broken the previous night's silence, and the chairs around her scraped as members leaned in. "Today is about guardrails," she said, voice steady, not grudges. Across the table, a senior Democrat answered with a nod. "We vote this bill out before sunset." The majority caucus moved fast, moved like it knew the country was watching, and introduced a timetable measured in hours rather than weeks. Draft text tightened as lawyers crossed out loopholes and wrote definitions in plain English: gift, travel, lodging, debt, trust shell. And the phones rang. "Comprehensive investigation," the ranking member announced into microphones. "Subpoenas for financial records, travel manifests, charter registries, and property transfers connected to any justice, past or present." A murmur rippled through the chamber, like the first tremor before a quake. Then came the hesitation from the other side of the aisle, not a retreat exactly, but a recoil. A freshman Republican from a swing district stared at the polling crosstabs and whispered to an aide, "We can't die on this hill." Another, a committee veteran with a practiced baritone, said on camera, "I believe in the court, but I will not defend luxury voyages paid by billionaires." Several slipped out side doors to avoid the press, then returned with carefully threaded statements about faith in institutions and the urgent need for transparency. Constituent phone lines lit up like a runway. Town halls shifted from routine to volatile. In private, one strategist summed it up in a sentence that spread between offices: distance or drown. Across First Street, the Supreme Court became the eye of the storm. Protesters ringed the steps at dawn with signs that read simply, "We deserve honest judges." Clerks swiped into the building with heads down, while marshals watched from the shadows. Inside, whispers traveled faster than elevators, chambers fielding press calls, chambers fielding donors' chambers, asking whether to issue a statement and deciding to wait. The marble that had always felt eternal suddenly felt like stage scenery, the kind that wobbles when someone slams a door. This time the door had been slammed on live television. Back in the Capitol, leadership huddled with parliamentarians to root the bill through a clean path with maximum daylight and minimum delay. Jasmine briefed a circle of members using a single page. She'd memorized the problem, the fix, the enforcement, the timeline. She kept the words blunt and spare the way working people speak when a paycheck is short. "This is not punishment," she said. "This is prevention." A senior whip counted votes on a yellow legal pad and exhaled when the numbers crested. Television crews turned committee hallways into impromptu studios. One anchor asked on air, "Is this a constitutional crisis?" Another said, "It's a political one already, and the constitutional part may be next." Pundits argued over the separation of powers, while a crawl at the bottom of the screen tracked co-sponsors in real time. The country's pulse spiked. Callers flooded radio shows from farm towns to high-rises. What had been a scandal now looked like a pivot point. The minority caucus tried a countermove, a motion to delay for additional study. It failed under the weight of 1 million overnight views and the memory of a justice shouting, "Get out." A senator from a once safe state cleared his throat before microphones and said, "I respect the court, but I cannot ignore what my constituents saw." A colleague followed with transparency should terrify only those with something to hide. The words were careful, but the distance was unmistakable. It read like a weather report, high pressure building winds, shifting visibility diminishing for anyone defending the status quo. The court, unused to being the headline instead of the final footnote, felt the crisis close in. Clerks drafted a bland statement that died in a stack of drafts because bland would not hold. Law professors wrote open letters overnight. Retired judges gave quotations that sounded like warnings. Even some donors sent messages that were not threats but were not comfort either. They wanted stability, not spectacle. If the robe was supposed to be armor, it now resembled glass, reflective, brittle, beautiful, breakable. Late in the day, the gavel fell again, and the emergency session bled into evening. Jasmine stood at the microphones with a small crowd behind her. Nurses, teachers, a postal worker still in uniform. "We're writing the rules we should have had all along," she said. "No more secret gifts. No more secret trips. No more secret deals." She looked straight into the cameras. The people built this building. They are entitled to see who is buying influence inside it. By nightfall, she was more than a clip. She was a standard. Petitions multiplied, district offices reported lines at the door, and volunteers asked where to knock first. Commentators began calling her the face of judicial reform, and for once the label fit. She did not accept it with a speech. She accepted it by working the phones and cutting new language into the bill until the verbs were the strongest words on the page. In the hushed stacks of the Capitol Library, she read past midnight. When she closed the final book, the city outside was still awake. The votes were barely tallied when the next wave hit not another hearing, but a nationwide conversation with no off switch. By sunrise, campus auditoriums flickered to life, radio trucks lined curbs, and producers pinned topic cards to corkboards. The question on every flyer, chyron, and podium was the same in quotes and in bold as the Supreme Court still untouchable. It did not sound like a seminar topic. It sounded like a fire alarm. Students streamed in, still clutching coffee, and retirees took seats 2 hours early, as if they were guarding a place in history. The hum in those rooms felt like the tight breath before a verdict. At State U, a dean of law faced a crowd that wrapped around the building. "We will discuss facts, process, ethics, and power," she said, palms open, voice steady but urgent. A civil rights historian described the long road from hard-won rights to court reversals, and the audience scribbled like their pens could catch sparks. A constitutional scholar laid out how money moves through politics after landmark decisions and lowered his voice when he reached the words corporate speech. A student at the mic trembled, then asked if justice can be bought, what is left for the rest of us. No one laughed, no one sighed, no one moved. The room answered with silence and stayed there. Across town, a think tank turned its sixth-floor atrium into a televised roundtable. The moderator's first sentence was plain and devastating: "Is the Supreme Court still untouchable?" A former judge said the robe is not a shield, it is a responsibility, and the line drew murmurs. A policy analyst broke down how luxury trips and shadow gifts corrode trust faster than any bad ruling. A union nurse in the audience stood and said, "We do 10-hour shifts and pray our car starts. I don't want judges on yachts." The cameras found her face and held because truth sounds best when it has calluses. Broadcast town halls erupted from Boston to Bakersfield. Anchors kept asking the same thing, never blinking: is the Supreme Court still untouchable? Callers poured in from farms, factory floors, city buses, and kitchen tables, each voice raw with something more than outrage. A veteran said, "I fought for law to mean something." A teacher said, "My students think rules are for them and exceptions are for the rich." A small business owner added, "I can't expense groceries, but a billionaire can expense a justice." The host let the question hang like smoke no fan could clear. Meanwhile, the streets found their rhythm. The first banners appeared at lunchtime block, letters painted on bedsheets and cardboard: "No justice for sale." By evening, the phrase moved like a drumbeat through cities and small towns. The same 4 words on courthouse steps, overpasses, and public squares. People who had never marched before showed up with strollers and dogs, electricians and librarians walking shoulder to shoulder. One sign read, "We followed the rules. you followed the money. Another read, bring receipts to the bench. Police stood back, hands clasped, measuring the crowd and seeing not rage without aim, but aim without fear. The air felt charged and beautifully simple. In Chicago, the chant bounced off glass towers like a metronome. In Atlanta, a brass band slid into the march and raised the hair on everyone's arms. In Spokane, a teenager led 3 blocks of neighbors with a voice bigger than her jacket. In El Paso, elders carried candles and whispered prayers for courage. No broken windows, no burned cars, just the heat of people who finally looked power in the eye and refused to blink. A city planner watching from a doorway said, "This is what accountability looks like when it walks." Then came Dallas, a homecoming, with the electricity of a title fight and the tenderness of a family reunion. The airport concourse saw a crush of cameras and roses, and by the time Jasmine Crockett stepped into the arrivals hall, the applause had formed its own weather. A boy on his father's shoulders shouted, "You stood for us," and Jasmine pressed a hand to her heart. Outside, the motorcade crawled through streets lined with people not waving flags but holding hand-lettered promises. Keep standing. Keep asking. Keep the lights on. The skyline glittered, but what glowed brightest was the crowd. They gathered at the old community center with folding chairs and a rattling AC duct. Jasmine took the mic and said only, "Thank you," and the room erupted again, not with noise but with relief. A school bus driver told her, "I do not feel small this week." A cafeteria worker said, "You made their get out our we are here." A pastor nodded and added, "Power is alone. The people decide when to call it back." Jasmine listened more than she spoke and left the podium without theatrics because the moment itself was loud enough. Across the country, something else began to move beneath the noise footsteps toward microphones' doors, opening to legal pads, courage clearing its throat. A yacht steward called a local station and said he had logs. A charter broker contacted a reporter and said she had numbers that never made the brochures. A former property manager from Savannah said she had closing statements, repair invoices, and photographs from the day the deed changed hands. They were not looking for book deals or cameras. They were looking for daylight. Each voice was a small lamp, and together they started to make morning. Investigative desks converted break rooms into war rooms. Editors tacked timelines to corkboards and drew red thread from names to dates to vessels to addresses. Fact-checkers dialed banks, ports, and registries, and the answers came back like sonar pings in deep water. One document turned into 2, then 5, then a folder thick enough to feel like a brick. Lawyers reviewed every line and said, "We print with what we can stand behind," and reporters nodded, hungry but careful. Peak hour passed, then midnight, then dawn, and the lights never dimmed. When the stories hit, they landed with the weight of steel. Not speculation, not rumors, logs, ledgers, wire confirmations, charter contracts, and property records. The public could trace a finger down a page and see dates and totals, week-long voyages priced like small hospitals, homes trading hands like chess pieces. The headlines were clean and merciless, luxury with a price tag. Voyages of influence. The house that trust forgot. In sidebars and explainers, editors walked readers through every number because insult fades, but arithmetic endures. The comment sections, usually a swamp, sounded almost disciplined. This is why we needed to see the books. As the documents spread, so did an image that would not die. Media packages stitched together the same collage until it felt like a brand burned into national memory yachts iced in chrome villas, with infinity pools, helicopter pads gleaming like coins, and a black robe hovering like a shadow over it all. Editorial cartoons drew the scales of justice, replaced with a cocktail glass and a boarding pass. Morning shows split screens between a courthouse and a marina. Late-night monologues did not have to be cruel. They only had to be accurate. Laughter came in the kind that hurts after. In classrooms, civics teachers threw out lesson plans and wheeled in projectors. The assignment changed from define separation of powers to explain what happens when trust fails. A girl in the back asked, "If rules are real, why are they different at the top?" A boy near the door said, "Maybe the rules are fine, maybe it's the people." The teacher said, "That is the right argument to have," and chalked ethics code on the board. The bell rang, but nobody moved first. From pulpits and union halls came sermons without scripture and speeches without slogans. A minister said, "We are not angry at wealth. We are angry at its shortcuts." A machinist said, "I pay for my own vacations, and I don't get to set the law." A librarian stood up and said, "Transparency is not vengeance. It is the light that lets us read the truth." In each place, the room answered with the same sound, chairs creaking as people leaned forward ready to do more than clap. The country's spine straightened a notch. Outside the Supreme Court, the steps filled every morning before the justices' lights blinked on. The signs were simple. The words fewer, the message loud enough to pass through stone. No justice for sale. Clerks avoided the windows and took side corridors while marshals walked their measured loops, faces professional but eyes busy. Inside, the silence felt like a kind of pressure, the way a room changes before a storm. Opinions were drafted, redrafted, then set aside for newer drafts that sounded more aware of the street, which is to say, more aware of the nation. The building looked the same, but it no longer felt untouchable. Universities kept their forms going into the night. "Is the Supreme Court still untouchable?" the Marquis asked again, and no one called it repetitive, because the question had not finished its work. Panelists now included a former clerk who talked about the culture of deference and the cost of speaking up. A journalist laid out how sources found courage when they saw crowds instead of empty plazas. A young lawyer, eyes rimmed red from volunteering, said, "We are not tearing down the court. We are lifting the standard." The audience clapped the way people clap for themselves as much as for the stage. Dallas did not wait for permission to celebrate. Murals bloomed on brick walls overnight. Jasmine rendered in vibrant strokes, chin-lifted eyes fierce, the caption reading, "Simply stand." At a small diner, someone taped a receipt to the tip jar that read, "For the lights you turned on," and the owner framed it before noon. At a school assembly, a principal told students, "You saw what voice looks like. Measured, fearless, grounded," and the gym thundered. The city did not crown a queen. It recognized a neighbor. The difference mattered. More witnesses kept arriving, some with names they allowed on paper, and some with names that would never see print. A captain from a charter fleet brought a ledger that lined up with a rumor and made it fact. A contractor who remodeled a coastal villa produced work orders that folded neatly into a property timeline. A driver showed a spiral notebook with dates and destinations in block letters, nothing fancy and therefore very hard to fake. Each person looked nervous at first and steadier by the time they finished. The country learned that courage is contagious. The montage on nightly news hardened into a single story. No spin could soften yachts, mansions, luxury, and rot. Not alleged rot, not theoretical rot. Rot measured in calendars and invoices in the distance between a judge and a billionaire, shrinking until it looked like a handshake. A commentator said, "This is not about envy. It is about the price tag attached to power." Another said, "If justice is blind, why does it keep finding the private dock?" People did not need the jokes anymore, but they laughed anyway to keep from shouting. By week's end, the forms had tallied thousands of questions, the marches had crossed state lines, and Dallas had lost count of the hugs delivered at grocery store checkout lines. The phrase on the banners remained the same, and somehow kept growing, "No justice for sale." In every place it appeared it meant something slightly different and exactly the same. It meant students wanted a future with rules that stick. It meant workers wanted a country where effort beats access. It meant the court for all its marble belonged to the people who built the quarries. The question that started the week still stood at its center. Is the Supreme Court still untouchable? In lecture halls, on sidewalks, and on living room carpets, the country kept turning it over like a coin. "Untouchable is not the point anymore," someone said. "Accountable is." And when the cameras panned across the faces on those steps, nurses, clerks, janitors, teachers, carpenters, students, the answer felt less like a verdict and more like a promise. The conversation had reached critical mass and refused to cool. The lights stayed on. The forms ran late into the night, the chants lingered on the steps, and then the noise settled into a single, steady beat. What do we do with this lesson? When the cameras cooled and the signs were stacked in closets, the country was still awake, staring at its own reflection. What began as a scandal had turned into a mirror, and in that mirror, a hard truth stared back. Justice is not only a verdict, it is the ethics of the person holding the scales. The nation could feel the difference, like the shift in weight before a verdict lands. Professors wrote the lesson on whiteboards in thick, patient strokes. Justice is conduct before it is consequence. They spoke plainly without flourish, explaining that a ruling can be lawful and still be wrong, because the hands that made it were not clean. Students nodded not because it was easy, but because it finally made sense of the knot in their stomachs. The case on the screen was not about statues or marble. It was about character, where the robe ends and the person begins. Ethics was no longer a footnote. It was the spine. In that setting, Jasmine's line entered the room like a bell. She did not deliver it from a podium or a stage, but from the memory of a hearing that changed the country's temperature. She looked into the cameras and said, "If justice can be bought with a yacht trip, then the entire nation will be sold." The words were not poetry. They were a measurement like a carpenter's mark on wood that tells you when the beam will break. Law students wrote the sentence into notebooks and circled it twice. Deans began to rearrange syllabi. The get-out hearing was not offered as spectacle, but as a case study how power behaves under light and how light behaves under power. In classroom after classroom, they froze the moment of the outburst and asked a new question: where does authority end and ethics begin? They mapped the money flows, traced the favors, and tested doctrines against common sense until the old answers sounded thin. The horizon of legal education moved a few feet closer to the public. Moot courts picked up the thread and wove it into practice. Teams argued not only about precedent, but about the duty to step aside when conflicts rise like floodwater. They rehearsed the difference between a right that can be exercised and a right that should not be used. Judges on the panels, the kind with office hours and book-lined walls, pushed students to speak in the language of people who punch time cards. The best performances did not sound clever. They sounded honest. Outside those rooms, the lesson walked in street clothes. Parents told children that rules matter most when no one is watching, because that is where character lives. A union hall printed the sentence on a poster: "Ethics is the part of law that happens in the dark." A veterans group said integrity is not ceremony, it is sacrifice in small private rooms where no one claps. The country's spine straightened another notch, one quiet story at a time. The press, bruised from years of being called enemies, found a steadier footing. Editorial boards wrote in plain sentences, "A nation cannot rent its judges by the week." Long-form pieces avoided fireworks and followed paper trails until the numbers told their own tale. The lesson grew heavier as it grew simpler, because simple things are harder to dodge. When the lights came up, the story did not shrink. It sharpened. Back in Dallas, the lesson had a face. Jasmine walked into gymnasiums and school cafeterias where microphones squealed and folding chairs complained. She did not ask for a parade. She asked for attention, and she got it in the quiet way a town gives itself to someone it trusts. She repeated the line each time, not as a threat, but as a guardrail. If justice can be bought with a yacht trip, then the entire nation will be sold. People would murmur, not because it was new, but because it sounded like truth you can touch. Law schools cataloged the hearing like an anatomy lab for institutional failure and civic courage. They broke it into parts: power, money, silence, speech, and then examined the moment of reversal when a command meant to erase a voice created an echo no one could stop. Case books drafted new notes: the difference between recusal in statute and recusal in conscience, the cost of secrecy in democratic legitimacy, the role of public scrutiny as an ethical corrective. Students learned that the law breathes best when the room does. Exams began to ask for remedies that behave like sunlight. The story spread to schools that do not award degrees. Adult night classes at community centers put the hearing on a projector and handed out highlighters. One woman who stocked shelves at night underlined the same sentence 3 times: "Nobody is above questions." A man who drives a bus read the line aloud and smiled because he recognized it from the back of his mind. The lesson was never elite. It was obvious, and obviousness can be the most radical thing in a city of jargon. The drama that hooked the country did not fade, it matured. People kept the urgency but dropped the shouting the way a rescue worker keeps calm with a clock ticking. Justice is not only a verdict, it is the ethics of the person holding the scales became the answer to every deflection. When someone said it is legal, the room asked, is it right? When someone said it is precedent, the room asked at what price. The conversation grew teeth. Meanwhile, the figure at the center of the storm settled into a role no pollster could have forecast. Jasmine did not act like a star. She acted like a witness who refuses to leave the stand. She showed up to committee rooms with a lunch in a paper bag and language that didn't need translating. When reporters asked for a slogan, she handed them a sentence that wasn't designed for hats. Accountability is not revenge. It is maintenance. In that small, steady way, she set a tone that other people could carry. Law clinics turned the lesson into service. Students helped citizens request records, taught neighbors how to read disclosures, and built little toolkits that fit on a phone. They explained that transparency was not a headline. It was a habit. When a process worked, they wrote it down for the next city. When it failed, they wrote that down too. The case study grew legs. In textbooks, the hearings transcript stood beside cases that students used to treat like scripture. Footnotes linked to audited statements and charter manifests, not rumors or leaks. Professors asked for reflection papers that did not recite doctrine, but wrestled with it. The sharpest essays did not end with triumph. They ended with work listing the parts of the system that still needed bolts tightened. In those pages, the lesson moved from outrage to upkeep. The nation found a common sentence in the end: no one is too big to be questioned, and no one is too small to speak. It sounded like a slogan until you tried to live by it, and then it felt like exercise. City councils opened their microphones longer. Court watchers learned the rhythm of filings and calendars. People who had never visited a courthouse learned where the clerk's window was and what questions to ask. The machinery of attention started slowly to hum. All of this kept the cinematic edge because the stakes did not shrink. The question behind every scene was still life or death for a republic who gets to count as equal when the powerful want a private entrance. The best storytellers on television understood that the thrill was not the shouting. It was the moment a room refuses to be bullied by a title. The camera lingered on faces that looked like the country, and the score under the footage was the sound of breath being held and then released. The action sequence was restraint. There was a reason the case study took root so fast. It was not about a perfect hero or a perfect villain. It was about pressure testing, the promise that rules apply up and down the ladder. In clinic basements and auditorium balconies, people came to see whether that promise still held. And when they saw someone from a working-class district stand up and hold a line, they learned a lesson that feels like oxygen. The most powerful person in a democracy is the one who will not look away. The story did not ask the country to choose cynicism or naivety. It asked for maintenance. It asked for ethics audits before ethics crises, schedules that belonged to the public, disclosures that read like sunlight. It asked for the habit of questions. On good days, that habit sounds like curiosity. On hard days, it sounds like courage. Either way, it sounds like citizenship. And so the lesson hardened into practice. Youth debate clubs held mock hearings with budgets and calendars. Senior centers hosted brown bag lunches on what conflict of interest means in human terms. Neighborhood associations adopted a simple rule: the person counting the money does not decide where the money goes. None of it made headlines, and all of it made a difference. That is how institutions heal, one bolt at a time. In law schools, the get-out hearing was filed under a unit that once had a dull title and now had a live wire running through it: institutional ethics. Students did not memorize it for the test. They kept it for the job. Public defender interns quoted the line about a nation for sale when they argued for fairness in bail hearings. Corporate interns wrote memos that began with questions, not excuses. The culture shifted a few degrees closer to what the public had demanded. At the center of that shift stood a sentence, clear and unembellished: if justice can be bought with a yacht trip, then the entire nation will be sold. It moved from caption to classroom, from poster to policy draft, because it said exactly what people felt and exactly what systems too often forgot. The words did not cure anything by themselves, but they drew a boundary on a map that had started to blur, and they dared everyone to respect it. By the time the semester ended, the case study had become a habit. Professors no longer introduced it with fanfare. They used it the way a pilot uses a checklist. Journalists referenced it without italics. Parents told it as a story with a beginning, a middle, and a task at the end. The country did not fall in love with scandal. It fell in love with a standard. The epilogue belonged to people, not to marble. They understood that justice is not a costume you put on. It is a posture you maintain when no one claps. They understood that the loudest title in the room does not win the argument if the facts are standing in the hallway, waiting to be let in. And they understood finally that a voice from a working-class district can carry across a continent if it refuses to bend. The lesson did not end the story, it steadied it. Justice is not only a verdict, it is the ethics of the person holding the scales. A country that believes that will keep its balance even when the room shakes. A country that forgets will sell itself piece by piece and call the bill progress. The hearing had given the nation something better than outrage. It had given the nation a way to stand. From lesson to legend, the night moved outside with a voltage you could feel in your ribs. Security swung the doors wide and the corridor became a current sweeping toward the steps like water finding its fall. Jasmine walked into it with her shoulders square, eyes bright as tempered steel, and the sound rose to meet her. Boom mics hovered red, tally lights blinked awake, and lenses hunted for the frame where resolve turns into memory. She did not look left or right. She looked forward as if the path had been scored across the marble hours ago. The roar climbed layer on layer until it sounded less like applause than confirmation. She reached the first riser and turned to face the nation, letting the noise fall back like a tide. A hush traveled the plaza, elastic and expectant, the kind that makes a camera steady itself. Her voice was low but carried clean. I am from Dallas, and I do not get out. I stand for justice. The words struck with the crispness of a gavel and the tenderness of a promise. People cheered, but you could still hear the sentence sitting intact inside the roar, clear enough to repeat to a child. Phones lifted like a canopy of glass, catching and multiplying the moment until it seemed to glow on its own. In minutes, the clip jumped from shoulder screens to storefront TVs, to taxis, to leaving flights, to living rooms, still lit after midnight. Editors froze the frame where her jaw sets and her eyes do not blink, filing it under endings that begin something. Reels stacked themselves, the gavel, the shout, the refusal, the witness, the receipts, and then this quiet blade at the end. Paramedics watched between calls. Nurses queued it up in break rooms. Veterans replayed it in bars like a toast. Teenagers stitched the line over beats, and grandparents texted it to group chats with a one-word caption finally. The image did not ask. It insisted, and the insisting spread. She raised the microphone once more, not to bask, but to bind. Her tone dropped, and the plaza hushed as if a conductor's hand had fallen. Every lavish shadow will be stripped away. Only the truth endures. The line landed like a verdict read at midnight, quiet, irreversible, already part of the record. Reporters lowered their questions and simply let the cameras drink the moment. Even the floodlights seemed to agree, humming like a chorus that knew the words. By dawn, the still shot had become a stencil for a generation. Murals bloomed on brick. Jasmine, in profile chin, lifted a thin crown of headlines behind her, and kids posed beneath them with shy, defiant grins. Teachers opened classes with the frame and asked what courage looks like when it keeps its voice. Managers dropped it into decks about ethics and trust, because a picture can carry what a policy forgets. Historians, writing faster than they liked, called it the closing image of a political and legal earthquake. They meant the obvious thing and the deeper thing: the country would never look at its highest court the same way again. She stepped down through the last row of lights as the crowd thinned to a soft current. A janitor said, "You spoke for us," and she answered, "You kept the lights on," and the exchange felt like the signature on the night. Cameras kept rolling because endings this clean are rare, and no one wanted to blink. People would later say the story went into history right there, when a woman walked out to a cheer, looked straight into the lens, and left a line the nation could live by. They would quote both of them because both were needed. I am from Dallas, and I do not get out. I stand for justice. And the benediction that followed, steady as sunrise, every lavish shadow will be stripped away. Only the truth endures. From that night forward, the footage opened documentaries, closed lectures, and anchored dinner table arguments about power and trust. News packages began with marble and ended with her face, because the arc from institution to individual told the truth better than charts. When people wrote timelines, they drew a sharp line through that date and labeled it the day the robe stopped being untouchable and started being accountable. Courts did not crumble, they recalibrated, and the public learned to watch with eyes open instead of bowed heads. It felt like an earthquake, not because buildings fell, but because foundations shifted in ways you could feel underfoot. And if anyone asked where the change began, the answer was simple enough to fit on a placard on the steps under the lights when a voice refused to step aside. History nodded and the camera finally let the night exhale. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.